All right, let's see. We are moving on to the next module, which is going to be React for the next couple of weeks. So this is this is basically the next phase of abstraction layers that we're going to be introducing throughout the semester. The first one was a very thin layer of abstraction, which is jQuery, that abstracts the browser, basically. It abstracts the DOM, so you don't have to manipulate the DOM directly using JavaScript. Instead, it adds this very thin layer of API that allows you to treat different browsers in the same way, different versions of JavaScript in the same way, through the same API. Okay? But it's still very low level. You're still manipulating individual elements. You're adding elements, you're removing elements, you're manipulating their attributes. So it's very as close as possible as you ever want to get to manipulate the DOM. Okay? The next couple of libraries I'm going to be introducing, which is first React and then Angular later halfway through the semester, those are fairly high-level abstractions on top of the DOM. All right? You never really know what's going on underneath. Instead, what these layers try to do is to create an object-oriented representation so that you're ever only manipulating objects. Right? And as you manipulate the objects, somehow there's a magic that happens behind the scenes that manipulating an object here or an array there, then the DOM gets re-rendered. Right? Whenever this object model changes, then the equivalent document object model gets manipulated, right, and reflects the UI reflects whatever the object is. Make sense? React is just a JavaScript library. It only cares about how to be able to create your own types of elements. So it allows you to kind of extend the default behavior of HTML so that you can create your own HTML elements, right, and with their own behaviors, and be able to break up an application in terms of these components that hide behind these high-level HTML elements. Right? So if you don't like HTML, you can redefine it. You can define your own version of HTML, okay, that has its own attributes, its own behaviors. Okay, so it doesn't impose anything else other than the UI on how it gets built up in terms of these components. As opposed to Angular, when we look at a little later, it's more opinionated how the application gets broken up, right? And the type of architecture that you need to use, that it imposes on you that you have to build applications in this particular way, right? A React is not as opinionated, right? It leaves a lot of things up to you. How is it that you want to architect your application? Okay, so it's a nice a step up, right, from jQuery. It's a little bit higher level abstraction, but not too much. Right, it leaves a lot of things open-ended on what choices we want to do. But then when we get to Angular, you will have seen a lot of the concepts such as components and creating your own elements, and then we'll be ready to understand Angular. Angular is quite more a little bit harder to grasp, a lot of more things going on. Right, React is just a front-end library. All right, so we'll be doing that for the next week or so. Next week, the following week after we complete React, we will add another level of abstraction on top of React, or in addition to React, which is the handling of state, application state on the client side. Okay, there are some limitations on the way React handles state and how it propagates state information throughout the application when you break it up into multiple components. Right, so state might be handled at the top of the root of the application, and then it needs to propagate to all the other subcomponents. Right, it's a little bit cumbersome the way the out-of-the-box React does it, and Redux has become a fairly popular alternative on how to handle state on the client side. Okay, so yeah, for the next 2 weeks we'll be doing React, React.js, meaning React on the browser. Right, rendering user interfaces using React, the React JavaScript library on a browser. The following week, after that, we'll switch a little bit, switch gears a bit, and instead of rendering user interfaces on the client on a browser, we'll render user interfaces, but on a mobile, on a native device. Yes.
This might be a stupid question, but is all of the goals of this abstraction to make it become easy to write?
Right. So the intention is that JavaScript has become more and more complex. The applications are becoming much bigger than they were intended originally. More and more we have seen applications that were written on the server side, starting to migrate more to the client side, because folks are looking for a better experience on the front end. I mean, you could certainly implement any application on the server side, but folks were looking for a more desktop-like experience. On a desktop, you can things are very dynamic, right? You can drag things around. If you make a change, you see the response immediately. So folks are looking for that kind of interaction, and just the old school way of implementing applications on the server side just doesn't cut it. The example I always give is if anybody remembered MapQuest, MapQuest. Had all the use cases that you would expect, right? You could search, you could pan in, you can pan left, right, up, down, you can zoom in, zoom out. But it was a server-side application, right? Every time you interacted with the application, the entire page would refresh, right? You would throw away the entire document, right? Go out to the server, and the server would tell it what to render, right? And it was a very jarring experience, okay? Contrast that with when Google Maps came out, right? And you could grab, you had direct manipulation of the map. You can grab it, you can flick it around, you can zoom in and zoom out. The page would not reload, right? And so it was a much better experience, right? And I was amazed the very first time that I looked at this. This is the future, and all applications have been moving towards that, to that kind of single-page application, loaded once, don't reload the page ever again, right? Only hit the server, use the server only as a data source, okay, not for rendering purposes, but only go to fetch data from a remote database, right? So all applications are moving towards that, and so there was a lot more demand on the type of application that you had to build on JavaScript that would run on a browser. Okay, there were very few libraries back then, and as applications became more and more complex over time, folks were looking to say, well, what can we learn about building large applications? It says, oh, look, on the server side, they've been building large applications, web applications for years, for decades. What have they learned? Okay, and so a lot of the ideas that were solved already on the server side have been slowly migrating to the client side as well. Like things such as inversion of control, singleton patterns and service layers and data models and all those ideas that have been very well understood on the server side, right? We're seeing a lot of those same ideas that have been around for a while migrating themselves to the client side. So the same level of abstractions that they've come up with to solve large applications on server side, they've now available on the client side as well. Okay, basically all this is to deal with complexity, right? That's why we don't code in assembly anymore, right? We built an abstraction layer, C, and then we maybe did C++, right? And then every time a new generation comes up with with a more level of abstraction, and then object orientation, and then component technology, and then microservices, and so every time we're creating these level of abstractions, so that a single line of code does more things for us. Now we have annotations, right? And you just have to annotate something as an entity, and boom, it's mapped to a database. Right, that's pretty cool. So I don't even have to write the SQL anymore. Right? I don't have to write any SQL anymore. Right? You just annotate and it's done. Right? So all these levels of abstractions are as technologies mature, as we identify patterns, as we identify things that are boilerplate, that we don't want to do it anymore. As things as we like the CRUD repository, right? In my database class, we write CRUD, data access objects, where you can read, you can write, you can update, you can delete. After you've done 3, 4, 5 of these, you find a pattern. It says, I wish I could just parameterize this, right? If I could, somehow encapsulate this, and I could parameterize it, I won't have to write this ever again. And that's what what JPA does, right? JPA, you just give it a class, you annotate it as an entity, and it generates all the boilerplate stuff that you would have to write anyway. So all these frameworks, that's what they do. They create these levels of abstractions to simplify our lives, right? Obviously, eventually, everything becomes zeros and ones. All right, so that's where we're going, right? We'll spend the next 3 weeks in React land. Then we'll switch gears and we'll spend another 3 weeks on the mean stack. All right, so let's talk about the first assignment in the React world.